Hello and welcome to the second session of building a Spring Boot project, of building a To-Do app using Spring Boot. So in the first session, what we have built was, we have built a task service and the different endpoints corresponding to the task service, which is basically this. So we created the post endpoint for tasks, which would create tasks, and then the get, put, delete endpoints, which would retrieve, update or delete specific task. And here I am actually attaching the link for the part 1. If you have not seen part 1, please go through that part 1 so that you get the source code of how to build a task service. And also, why we name our endpoints like this, like the endpoint URLs are all nouns and the actions are all verbs, why we name like this. I have another video where I share the best practice on API or REST naming, and that video is also attached there. So please refer to those two videos. And in the current session, what I'm going to show is how we can create the user service, like how we can create user and how we can actually verify with the created user's credential. So this is going to be the subject of this session. So how we are going to create user is this. So during user creation, the most important thing what we are going to do is how we are going to store the password. So the password is neither stored in clean text or plain text, or not the password is encrypted. Rather, a hash of the password is generated using any one of the hashing algorithms, where Bcrypt is the most prevalent and the most used hashing algorithm. So with the Bcrypt algorithm, the password is hashed and the generated hash is stored in the database. And then during password verification, we retrieve the generated hash from the database, and we again generate the hash corresponding to the password entered by the user, and then we compare the two hashes. So the plain text password is not stored in the database. The plain text password is never retrieved from anywhere excepting user input. So during the password verification, we compare the two hashes, and we do this using the Bcrypt hashing library, which is the most popular and most widely used hashing library in Java. But there are also other hashing libraries, something which is even more powerful than Bcrypt. But I'm not going there in this session. Now, quickly, what should be the code base? What should be the code to actually to hash the password using Bcrypt is this code. So this simple line can actually create a hash of the password, which would be a very long string, and we store that long string, which is the hash of the password, in the database. And when the user tries to log in, we actually verify the provided password, which is this candidate, with the hash which is stored in the database. And if it matches, then we allow login, and if it doesn't, then we block the user. Then we say it's an invalid password. So that's how normally password is hashed and stored during the user creation, and the hashed password is verified during user verification. And that's the main subject of this particular user service, which I'm going to demonstrate to you now. So let us start with the demo. You can get the complete source code from the link in the description from my GitHub repo. So this is the To-Do app part 2. The branch is To-Do app part 2, where we develop the user service. The task service was already developed by us in the previous session. Now in the user service, we create the user. So we have two endpoints, one for creation of the user and the second for retrieval of the user, provided valid credentials are provided. So this is creation of the user, and again the endpoint name is users with post mapping, because the endpoint name should always be noun, and the post means that the users would be created, and we are returning a response status HTTP status created, which is 201. So which means that something has been created. So we are not returning the default HTTP status 200. And then when we are creating the user, then you can see that this is the single line with which the Bcrypt is actually generating the hash of the password, and then we are storing that hash of the password in the database. And here we are calling the DAO layer, and in the DAO layer we are using JdbcTemplate to actually store the hash of the password in the field user password in the database. Okay, so that was how the that was how the user was created. And you can see the Bcrypt library being used here. So this is the JdbcTemplate library, which is added in in POM, and also the H2 database for the embedded database. We are using the embedded H2 database for simplicity, but of course you can replace with an actual MySQL, with an actual PostgreSQL, or maybe SQLite, or whatever you want. And the other dependencies are Spring Boot Starter JDBC. I have not used Spring Data JPA because Spring Boot Starter JDBC uses JdbcTemplate, which is much easier than JPA. So I just wanted to keep the project as simple as possible. And then of course the Lombok is there for the getter setter generation and the Spring Boot Starter web. So these are only the dependencies. Now let us go back and see the other endpoint from where we are retrieving the credential. So from here we are retrieving the credential. So we are first retrieving the user details, but with only the username, and then we are checking if the provided password matches the hashed password. So basically what this function does is it hashes the provided password and retrieves the stored hash, and then compares if both of them are same, then it returns the user object, else it throws a password mismatch exception, and this password mismatch exception is being caught in my exception handler to throw a HTTP status forbidden. So if you have given wrong credential, the system will not allow you to log in. It will throw a password mismatch exception, which will be caught by this controller advice, by this exception handler. Again, this is another best practice of Spring Boot. Like, this is how we should handle exception in Spring Boot, and we can handle different kinds of exceptions. So here, if there is a password mismatch, then we are going to throw HTTP status forbidden. Coming back to user controller, of course, if the password matches, then the user gets back the user detail. Now let me run the project and show you the demo. Of course, all instructions are very clearly mentioned in the README. So how to build a project and everything have been very clearly mentioned in README. So let me quickly build the project. And then I'm going to run the project as soon as it's built. So now I'm going to run the project. So this would run the Spring Boot application. Now the Spring Boot application has started. Another thing, please notice that Hickory pool is the connection pool for connecting to database. So this is another beauty of Spring Boot, another power of Spring Boot. Like, Spring Boot automatically adds Hickory connection pool to manage the database connection, which is actually a great benefit, so that the database connections are much faster. So now let us execute the query to create the user. So you can actually execute this query to create the user. Sorry, execute this call command to create the user. So I'm going to send a post request to API/1/users, and with the body which contains username, password, and the full name. So the user has been created. The indication of that is the HTTP status 201, which is a positive response for creation, has been returned. Now let us try to verify if the user has been indeed created correctly by trying to log in using the other endpoint. So the other endpoint for login is user-credentials, as I showed you earlier, like user-credential, and that is also a post endpoint. So that's why I am passing post request -x post, and these are the two things which I am passing in the JSON, because if you go to login details, again, this username and password are the two fields of login details. So see, it has returned everything because the credential was correct. So it has returned HTTP status 200 along with the password. Normally we will not return the password in production. I am just returning it here just to show you that this is the password which is stored in database. And now, say for example, if I provide a wrong credential, then see what happens. So I will just remove this. See, it returns HTTP 403, that the credential does not match. So that's it, more or less. Just one more thing, also navigate to the model package, and the model package typically contains all the models which I'm using, like say for example the user object which is used to create the user, and the login details object which is used to pass on the login details. And you will see that all the models, the best practice for designing the models is to actually use the Lombok annotation so that all the getter, setter, constructor, everything are auto-generated for you. Okay, I think that's it more or less. I hope you can clone the code base and you should be able to also run the user service. So our main takeaway from this is we should never store the password plain text or even encrypt the password. We should hash the password using a standard hashing algorithm, and then we should compare the hash. And all of this we have done without using Spring Boot security, because Spring Boot security is really great, but it's also a bit complex. So this is the most simple representation, most simple yet very secure representation of how we can build the backend of any user service using Spring Boot. Not only a To-Do app, but also any user service. So if you think that this session was valuable, then consider subscribing to my channel and share it with your friends and whoever who you think will benefit from this. And also like and provide your feedback in the comment. And I will shortly publish the third and the fourth parts. Thank you.